Hey, this is Tamago. Welcome back to another episode of The Legend of the Eyes with the Scavengers. In the previous episode, we basically have completed the quest book with the exception of the final end fight, of course. But you may have noticed that throughout this entire series, I have not placed a single bit of rail, which, if you ask me, feels quite wrong for a Tamago Rail series. So before we wrap up this series, I'll be connecting the bases and builds that the other scavengers have built throughout the series over here. I think that's what's really nice about playing on an SMP because, you get to connect different builds that were not made by you. So you don't have to put in, all of the effort into those builds. Now, the thing is, The Legend of the Eyes doesn't have a rail specific mod. The closest thing we have is Create, which adds its own rails. However, I think for the scale of, the builds and how far things are in this world, it would be a bit overkill. I mean, you can see that most of our stuff fits in this small area over here. Which is kind of the point, we wanted everything to be close together so that we could collaborate more easily. So I think for this series, these vanilla rails would suffice. So what's the key idea then behind this build? Well, in vanilla Minecraft, when you have a powered rail right next to a block, right, it will push it off in the other direction. Now, the solid block requirement right next to it is very important because powered rails only speed up minecarts which are already moving. And if they are just stationary, nothing will happen to it, as you can see. Now, some more traditional or older designs would use this U shape over here. So instead of having a solid block, it would use gravity to get it started, to start moving along. And then with some velocity, this power wheel would speed it up. Although it is a simple design, it does have this shape over here, which I don't think is the most aesthetically pleasing because the tracks don't stay level, which is somewhat unrealistic. So although this will work for smaller stops, I do want something a bit nicer, at least in my opinion, for the larger stops. So that's where this slightly big contraption is. Don't worry, it's not going to be this messy in the end. On the right side, it's just me messing around with the redstone timings. So how do we simulate this block over here? Well, the idea is we're going to retract this rail over here into the wall. And we're going to extend this block right over here, which is on the floor up, so that it will push the minecart along. Now, although that sounds simple, it's slightly more complicated because the timing is actually opposite on the retraction and the extension. So the order things need to go in is that first we need to retract this rail. And then we need to extend the piston on the ground. Oh, this one. And at about the same time, the powered rail should come on so the minecart can go. Now, to revert back to the original position, we need to go in the opposite order. Namely, this has to be retracted back to the floor. Sorry, this one. And we need to push this rail back out like so. So how do we achieve this then? Well, the main ingredient in making this work is a pulse extender over here. So when we first hit the button, with no delay, will this redstone torch turn off, retracting this piston over here. So this rail would get retracted directly. And after 2 ticks over here, as seen by the repeater, the floor will now extend, so allowing the minecart to go. Now remember that we need to hold this rail back for some time and give enough time for this floor to retract back down. So with this pulse extender over here, what it does is that it holds that redstone signal for some time over here, right? There's 2 ways the redstone can come, using that redstone stair over there or through this repeater over here. And that just gives enough time for this thing to retract back down, and then that will turn off and this will turn back on and it will extend and put the rail back in order. So to see this directly in action, here's how it goes. There you go. It's just enough time to not break things apart. And of course, these are not original inventions. It was from the Minecraft wiki to help me out with this. I'm definitely not a redstone pro per se. Now, I thought that was all that was needed to get the station working. Of course, I am missing something. In particular, you may notice that I was only testing the departures, but not the arrivals. Now, you may notice that this station works by stopping the player at every single stop. And when I arrive here, I need to choose if I want to go ahead and go to the next stop or if I want to drop off here, right? The problem is this stopping mechanism of a single powered rail doesn't always work every time, especially when the carts are going too fast. Here I have 7 powered rails just as a demonstration, and it'll actually just completely overshoot and continue on the player to the next stop. In less extreme cases, the minecart would just shoot by a bit and this piston mechanism wouldn't work as well because the minecart is like slightly pushed here and it doesn't get that full force, right? It's just partially, as you can see. So we also need a stopping mechanism as well on top of a starting one. So the solution I came up with was to just use the existing mechanism of starting to stop the minecart. In particular, when the minecart gets near to the station, the opposite end will retract the rail and put out this block here to stop the minecart from overshooting. Now, obviously, because this is on the opposite side, the redstone isn't as clean anymore. You have these crisscrossing redstone lines. There is probably a better way to do this that doesn't require this much redstone and this much mass, but you know, I'm not the expert, so I'll leave it up to you guys to figure out. And anyways, in the actual setup, I just ended up doing it ad hoc and just adapting to the given terrain and the way I did the tracks, you know. And here we had just a complete straight track. Sometimes I may bend directly, and so I need to place the detector rails in a different place and whatnot. And of course, you may need some additional delay, especially if this detector rail is further away, right? Because this thing will just retract before you actually get there. So in this case, I found that 2 ticks for this distance over here is nice and comfortable. And notice I had to give a gap over here so that, you know, these 2 redstone lines don't conflict. Okay, so here we go at full speed with the 7 powered rails. And as you can see, it just stops us right there with the block. And because this is by default unpowered, this rail here, it will just completely stop us and not push us in the other direction. Notice this 2 redstone is critical in getting this on when we actually want to depart. So yeah, lesson learned, you know, when you have a design, you need to test every single use case and don't assume that it works directly. In this case, it was just because my misunderstanding of the way powered rails work. It doesn't completely stop minecarts, but slows it down very abruptly. And you know, when a problem comes up like this, I just try to use whatever we already have to fix it instead of trying out new things which can overcomplicate the design. There are some other solutions that I tried that I hope would be a simple fix, but ended up not working. For example, you know, having 3 power rails instead of 1. This highly depends on the speed of incoming minecarts. And, you know, at this point, it's just a lot of fine tuning and it's not as nice as a guaranteed stop in the middle, right? But yeah, of course, with this mechanism, you do have to make sure it's coming in fast enough so it could, you know, directly stop dead middle. But, you know, having things just be faster, it's much easier than having to fine tune it and make it stop right in the middle using those 3 powered rails. Oh, and as a note, I initially thought that these things can be done on super glue and they create, you know, hand crank and whatnot. But I think rotational power is just a bit too complicated for me to deal with now as someone who's not very proficient with Create. So I just decided to go with vanilla. And anyways, this could be ported to Railink as well. So with the design explained, we're going to be building this in several locations. I did try to count the materials as you can see on the screen. I'm not sure how accurate it would be. So as you have seen in Railroad Industries, it's just going to be a couple of time lapses with me building this around here. And I guess I can talk about the stops in which I will be planning to make this. And now that I've explained this to you, I can finally tear this down so to not block this hidden door that Zelo has made using Create. So here's the first stop at what has evolved into my base, and it's called Tech Corner East. This was the first station I built in survival, so it took me a while to build this one, as you know, I haven't gotten it into my muscle memory yet. It also didn't help that I had to bend the tracks on one of the sides, so I needed to fiddle around with the redstone to ensure nothing conflicts. And also as a note for the next 2 stations or so, I wasn't yet aware of the stopping issue I talked about before, so the mechanism isn't built in this clip yet, only later afterwards. And for track design, I adapted a similar design from Railroad Industries, with the track having some light sources on top of cobblestone walls every couple or so blocks as necessary, except the blocks underneath the tracks are now stone bricks, which is, you know, quite an upgrade from the cobblestone I used in Railroad Industries. Now, Tech Corner North is another stop I'm planning to make, and it's located nearby the AE2 system and server tower, specifically in the cave near it, so we'll have to open up a tunnel to get there as you see here. And that was the reason why I also wanted Tech Corner North in addition to East, because I thought the cave that the stairs led to would make a nice spot for a station. It also allows an interchange with the mining line, which in the previous episodes would have been often used to get to the super smelter made by Zelo. Alright, so here is me actually building Tech Corner North. As I've mentioned in episode 4b, I have a tendency of making my builds too small for future expansion. so I had to move the slabs around here to ensure I had enough space to lead into the station. Despite this, I think there is a certain charm to building in smaller spaces and having to get creative. I only play Minecraft casually, so I don't have as much time as other content creators may have. It can lead to some pretty creative solutions and a cozy vibe in the area, I think. Next up is the house, namely the station at Perplex's base. To get there though, we need to cross over this gap. Now I've heard that Perplex has often used the footpath bridge I made in episode 1 to go back and forth between the server tower and Perp's base. And I've thought of just, building rails on top of that. Unfortunately, slabs were used there, which although adds some nice height variations to the bridge while still making it traversable without jumping, it has made it impractical for rails. So I just used a one wide bridge over here, which is odd by the way, to house the rails. Following on that thought of just using existing infrastructure, I also thought just, using Perp's existing bridge for the rails. However, that also has slabs, so I couldn't use that either. Additionally, Perp has also terraformed the cliff behind it with some berry bushes, so I couldn't go behind that hill either and make tracks on the hill. So I just went and dug a 3x3 tunnel through the hill to get there. I think it makes it interesting though, as it's the only lengthy continuous piece of rail tunnel there is on the server. And we also have the emergency exit signs, as we typically see with long tunnels in real life. So now that we're finally here, it's time to build the station. However, before that, I had to fill up this gap between these two hills so the station can rest on flat ground. It's also the first last stop in a line, and I decided to mark that with a stone wall, as well as filling in the missing piston location with a stone block, theoretically, allowing for future expansions. To actually see the house, go check out Perplex's channel, as at the time of recording it wasn't quote-unquote finished yet. But here I tried to connect it with a path that Perplex has built. Initially I tried to adopt the same organic style but struggled with it, so I just adapted my geometric style to the location. I think those differences are good as it makes the server more interesting. Oh, and as a short final note, we also have this awkward gap on the surface above the entrance to the tunnel. I still like the open feeling though, so to maintain that while allowing walking over that area, I decided to make a small glass bridge. I also added some indents supported by stairs to add some depth to the build and replaced the underground dirt with stone to make it look cleaner. Alright, now back where we started with Tech Corner East. This time I'm making the one for the central loop, which will run around this eye structure built by Bauticus. The loop is closed off by allowing continuation to Tech Corner North, where there is an interchange with the mining line to the super smelter, where there will also be a station for the central loop. I also built the tracks around the main area instead of cutting right through the middle of it to disrupt the footpath as minimally as possible. I think it also makes the line look nicer in the end anyways, making a loop around the central area. This directly leads to a structure built by Zelo, namely the Allay Sanctuary, which houses the Allays we found in the Woodland Mansion last episode. It also houses some bees. Unfortunately, the Allays somehow have escaped or perhaps died. At the time I was recording this, there were none left in there. And I guess as a general note, you may notice that some of these stations are out in the open. Perhaps in the future I would want to integrate them better into specific structures to make them feel more coherent. Like for example, right now, Tech Corner East felt especially just plopped in there from a building template, if you know what I mean. Alright, here come the more interesting stations, at least in my personal opinion. We're now at Zelo's Super Smelter, and as you may know, Zelo really likes building in even numbers. Hence, I couldn't just put in the standard template since it wouldn't be centered relative to this tower over here. I'll talk about the solution I went with over here a bit later. And if you're wondering why I kept breaking and placing this station, it was because for some reason I couldn't count properly to have appropriate spacing with the wall below so the redstone wouldn't get exposed. Oh well, it's now finally over though, but it was quite annoying. Besides the station, I think this is one of the scenic parts of the rail system, going around the Allay Sanctuary to not only not block the footpath, but also to get some scenic views of the amplified cliffs. And also, as you'll later see, a small issue I encountered was with the zigzag rails around the polygon shape of the lake sanctuary. For some reason, minecarts get slowed significantly around the very zigzaggy parts of the rails. I had to add a lot of power rails to keep the minecart going. Let me know if you know anything about that issue. If it is an issue, that is. Maybe it's just a feature that I wasn't aware of. Now back to the even station design. The solution I ended up going with is to build an even version of the station, filling in the gaps with cobblestone walls to add some depth. I think it ended up turning out fine though, balancing the build to have a roughly centered visual weight. I tried achieving this by making the line color off-center to the left and the power rail to board off-center to the right. You know, the two focal points of the station design. Now comes the most unique part of the entire rail system in my opinion, namely the track going from the super smelter to the mining area on the mining line. Because we are on amplified terrain, the vertical dimension becomes quite significant. We could see this here with Zelo's farm builds, where it's more staggered up and down rather than expanded horizontally. Since the sides of the cliff were already filled with Zelo's farms, I gave the bubble elevator a try on the minecart and it turns out it works. So to go down, we'll just drop the minecart like in older Minecraft roller coasters, and to go up, we'll just send the minecart through the bubble elevator. I think in the future, this can be extended to slime blocks and pistons and whatnot to make a fun rail system to ride through. More like a roller coaster than a rail system. But you know, it's Minecraft, we're here to have fun, not necessarily being precisely realistic. And you just saw over there, probably coming over to help. For some reason, I forgot that you could use slabs to prevent detector rails from transferring redstone down there. Once the detector rail issues were solved, it's now time for the mechanism to push the minecart back on the rails above. Initially, I tried to use solid blocks to push the minecart onto the tracks, but I wasn't so happy with it due to the amount of damage it gave the player. So I tried some other methods, but they don't seem to work. Eventually, I just adapted the rail and solid block mechanism in the station to slide in the rails after the minecart has flew above the bubble column. Initially, I was struggling to get the redstone timing working until I realized that it was actually the opposite in terms of order of extension and retraction compared to the station. In particular, we need to slide the solid block first into place and then the rail. And to open up the bubble column again, we do it in the opposite order. Adapting existing solutions to new problems can be very productive indeed. Now, the mining area station itself isn't very special though. I think it just looks nice underneath the stone segments above. The bubble elevator being next to the other bubble elevators is also nice. That was quite coincidental and not necessarily planned on my end. One thing that is different with it from the others though is the fact that there is a smaller station/stop in the area. I thought that since the nether area by Zelo wasn't visited as regularly, a secondary stop would suffice. If we think about it, we would have used the mining area to go back and forth between the mines and the tech corner. It would have been quite annoying to have to go down to the nether area then back up again if you just wanted to get from the mining area back to the base. Now, since both ends of this track segment is just the last stop, the U-shaped design wasn't needed after all. I just placed the powered rails against the walls to get them started. And while we have some time here, I just want to credit Sliced Lime for the series on the replay mod. I haven't watched it entirely, but I have used some techniques here like mixing the cat mole and the linear interpolations to get a camera path closer to what I want. So thank you for that. Alright, here comes the last station on the mining line, namely the one back to the north side of the tech corner. And yes, if you were coming to the super smelter via the central loop, you will be redirected to this station, hence it helps close the loop. I decided to connect it by just going on the side of this hill and opening up a 3x3 tunnel. Yes, Perplic, it's an odd numbered tunnel. Once again, Tech Corner wasn't built with stations in mind yet initially, so I had to adapt it to make this one fit to the existing build. I think it snugly fits here nicely and has a cozy vibe to it. And due to the angle here, you can also see me working on the redstone for the pistons. This one is a bit easier than the others though, as it is only one way, so I can directly wire up the detector rail to it. Alright, now we're back to the first line we started with, which I just realized I haven't told you the name of. It's called the baseline as a single word because, get it? It's a line that connects several bases together, with the exception of Zeals, which is reachable via the mining line. This next stop is Cosmic's base, which is essentially a lawn base, hence the name. It's almost non-existent now though, as storage is now centralized at a tech corner, removing the need for chests at that base. There are some plenty neat mini farms around there though. If you didn't know, a lawn base is a base without any building and is entirely focused on progression with machines and whatnot. Finally, here is the last station I built in this world, namely to Butticus's base called the bin. I think this is another interesting point of the rail system, as I had to climb pretty steep hills above the clouds to get there. Previously, this base was accessed via a waterfall before we had flying via hang gliders or elytras. Similarly to the LA Sanctuary area, this one has a nice view too of the amplified hills, but this time looking towards the main central area. The style of the station I ended up going for here, as you will see in a minute, also reminds me of a snowy cabin with it being on the side of a hill and the fences acting as guardrails. I think it feels quite cozy here as well. But that is pretty much it for me for this rail system. I hope you enjoy listening to the thought process behind it. If you are interested, the next segment will be a ride through the system with shaders and includes the full rail map, just like episode 40 of Railroad Industries. But yeah, overall, I'm very happy with the rail system. I'm very glad to be able to connect builds and bases built by other people, not just me or not just naturally generated structures. The amplified terrain, despite being painful in the early game, has also made this rail system very interesting. Thank you for this opportunity, it has been very fun. But yeah, thanks for watching this video and thanks for watching this series if you have gone this far. Have a good rest of your day and as always, God bless.